If there is one image that is intrinsically linked to the memory of Kashmir, it's of Dal Lake lined with houseboats. If there is one image that is all over the tourism pamphlets for Kashmir, it's again of Dal Lake lined with houseboats. Houseboats are often seen as quintessential Kashmiri experience, a market for Kashmiri hospitality and even of Kashmiri luxury. But have you ever stopped to consider who these houseboats house? Who these houseboats are homes for? They are home to Hanji community, Kashmir's water dwellers who have been living on various water bodies across Kashmir for generations. They have traditionally engaged in water-based trades like fishing, cultivating vegetables on floating gardens, growing shikaras, and, of course, running their houseboats as hotels for tourists. Houseboats are inextricably linked to tourism, and these families, especially those along the banks of River Jhelum, they depend on the flow of tourists for their livelihood. However, over the years, many development projects, including Smart City Srinagar, have completely uprooted their lives and livelihoods. The number of houseboats on Jhelum have been dwindling, and their inhabitants have been located on land. And on land, they are struggling to find their place. This year, Kashmir has seen an unprecedented rise in tourism. More and more people are flocking to Kashmir and, of course, to Dal Lake and staying in the houseboats. But while houseboats are welcomed as a tourist experience, why are houseboats endangered as homes for the Hanji community? For Hanjis, water isn't just their address, water is their identity. Dismantling houseboats is not just dismantling a structure, it is uprooting a whole community. It's destroying a very important, integral part of Kashmir's cultural fabric. In this podcast, we will try to explore the lives and struggles of houseboat communities along the banks of River Jhelum. Why did they make the waters their home, and why are they now being relocated from that home? Why is their culture, their way of living, their livelihood considered to be expendable, and why are they constantly being marginalized? Through this podcast, we will aim to uncover the life and struggles of River Jhelum's houseboat community in the face of Srinagar's constantly changing landscape. Let's begin with the first episode of our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. So the nature of this podcast is to locate marginalized people in urban history of Srinagar, and the community we are focusing on is Hanji community, or the people who have lived on water. So before that, we would like to understand or just give a picture of how Srinagar was developed and how does it briefly look. How does it look? So can you provide a brief overview of Srinagar's urban history, particularly how it developed across the water bodies and how important were the water networks in shaping the city?
Generally, if you see where we are located, it's central Kashmir, but it's sort of the low-lying area of central Kashmir. So the city as such is something that exists within the boundaries of certain major waterways. One is the River Jhelum. Historically, the city has evolved on the right bank of the city. Today, you find it on both banks, but historically, it was more on the right bank. And then the Dal Lake, the vast body of water, body of Dal Lake, Nagin Lake, and Pokhri, but it sort of serves as a sort of a limiting barrier. So you have the river on one side, you have the lakes on one side, and in between you have the hillock, which we call Kohimaran or Hari Parbat, which serves sort of as the physical limitation of the city on the northern side. So in between these three water bodies, the city more or less evolved organically, primarily around the river, And then, as we come to the later part of the modern history, you find that we had other sort of subsidiary man-made water channels. Nalamar is one of them. So, in a way, it's on again on the right bank, but in between these water channels, which are serving both as your main transportation spine, as well as also the areas where most of the urbanization is happening. And this is a phenomenon that continues, you could say, roughly up till the later part of the 19th century, and that is the period when we find there is a certain amount of migration from the historical core of the city to areas which were basically villages or the periphery of the city, and which then became the sort of the suburban areas like Barsulla, etc., etc. So that's the overview of how the city has historically evolved. But the importance of waterways is in a way that Srinagar, or rather, let me put it more precisely, Kashmiri culture civilization is the gift of Jhelum. So we are the river-based civilization. So all your major urban uh, indicators, or all your major urban centers are basically located on the river. So any major town, and again, it's just a coincidence that most of them are located on the right bank. So you start from Anantnag, come down to Bijbehara, Pawanpur, then you come to Srinagar, and you go further down, Patan, etc., etc. Most of the towns or the erstwhile capitals, political capitals of this Kashmir were located on the river bank, on primarily on the right side, as I said. And then because of that one river spine which is connecting north to south, you find that our transportation of material, grains, as well as people has evolved, has been happening on this one major spine.
Okay. And can we talk about the historic significance or the urban history of dwellers or Hanji community as we call them, and also to locate them across these water bodies?
I mean, one, you can see there's this sort of a mythical past legend wherein you see that we have this notion of Nagas as worshippers of snakes, but Nag is also a spring. So there is a certain amount of association with water feature. But then I would say, if we do accept with a certain amount of pluses and minuses the fact that Kashmir was primarily a water body. So life as it evolved and formed, and civilization as it occurred in the region, would have primarily revolved around the water. So water was something that was integral to urbanization, it was integral to civilization. Now, as for water people and what we understand by them today, you have different areas in Kashmir where you find people living along the periphery of a water body, and sort of through cultivation, irrigate, or maybe even fishing, etc., or any activity, they're basically getting their livelihood directly from the water body. It could be in Wooler, it could be in Anchar, it could be on any of the lakes. But primarily coming to Srinagar city, where it is sort of the focus of this study, I would assume. Srinagar, majorly we see a life that is taking place on the water, primarily along the Dal. So it is Dal, and on the back it is the Nagin Lake. So it is between Dal and Nagin Lake what we have this huge amount of activity happening. Was it historical? Can't say, but yes, I mean, again, as I said, there would have been certain coming up and down of people through transportation. So we know during the Mughal period, there were so many hundreds of boats that were floating on the Dal Lake. So we assume that these people would have lived in the periphery. Then again, we have the area of Meerberry, which is again, technically it's the office of the admiral in the Mughal administration, which is again located in the Dal, and that is now the core of urbanization in Dal. But mostly you'd say that it's only once we come towards 19th century and there are certain political occurrences or happenings happening in the city, primarily rice, that we find a certain section of the population migrated in a certain vast bulk and chunk and sort of settled in the area which is now known as the inner part of the Dal, and they sort of evolved a unique lifestyle. I mean, it's in a way they mirrored the urbanization processes in the Dal, and while they were in immediate vicinity, almost less than a kilometer away from the main city, but gradually because of political occurrences and happenings, they sort of self-isolated themselves for security purposes and other purposes from the rest of the city. So this is not a very strange An interesting example also, wherein you have two inhabitable sort of areas of a city in sort of contagious to one another, yet totally sort of uh, socially, culturally de-linked from one another. And this is a process that continues. And then as we come to the sort of the again the 19th century, we have another thing which is the fact that the Europeans start coming as and you have visitors coming to the area. And primarily they come on a occasion or a trip or a picnic. And one of the activity is hiking and going to the sort of the spots like Gulmarg, Pelgam, but the other is also the fact that they're engaged in hunt, shikar. And that's why they find it rather very convenient to sort of be located on the water and then sort of roam in and around the water. So you can do sort of hunting on the marshes and the low-lying marshy areas of the lake. So even the boat, which is a punt boat, which you use for shikar, is what we call shikara today. I mean, it is basically a boat which was used for hunting. That's why it's known as a shikara. And because of the fact that it became associated with tourism, it's now the name of a boat that you use for mostly purposes of leisure on the lake. So this is again a period when gradually you have this during the summer months, people primarily from Sopor and other areas, boat people coming, what we call the Hanjis to the city. They are carrying their sort of food cranes, and your food cranes are coming through them. Your supplies in terms of food, in terms of sand, etc., is coming through them. But also there's a section within this community which is primarily transporting the European visitors, the tourists, as we'll say in today's term, to the city. And what happens is gradually they help in evolving a sort of an industry, which would be the hospitality of the tourism industry. And then the doka, which is sort of the boat which was used for living as well as for sort of traveling up and down, is sort of improvised and it becomes the houseboat, the sort of the prototype of a houseboat. And we have historical records of a European by the name of what they call canard server, who sort of made certain adjustment to the deck of the boat to incorporate a sort of a sleeping area, a wash bedroom, and also a washroom. So gradually you find that there are these changes happening, but it is only in the 70s and the 80s that you have these people, the Hanjis, who are the houseboat wallahs, who now start permanently becoming a part of the cityscape. So now they are no longer sort of going back to Sopor at the end of the season, but now they are bona fide residents of city. They start buying. Initially, I mean, it's an era wherein they have a Dunga, which is also working as a houseboat. Then they have a bigger houseboat, which is more ornate, and the smaller Dunga, whereas you have the kitchen and where the family lives. But then gradually they sort of settle down on the land, the dam, or whatever the land is, which is on which the boat are moved. So they become a sort of, you would say, bona fide residents of the city. And as they become a part of the city culture, city life, the links with the original areas where they came from gradually start sort of loosening up. The links are not so, I would say the threads are sort of broken up here and there. So basically you'll find that in 70s and 80s, most of this houseboat tourism industry became a major phenomenon, and these families who are associated with it, now they became a permanent part of the city life. There were some who had started initially, let's say in the early part of the 20th century, but as a phenomenon, as an urban phenomenon, it gradually happens in around 70s and 80s. Corresponding to that, you have another thing, that there were these Dungawalas who were marooned on the Jhelum and on the what we call the Tsutwal. Now these are people who find that they are no longer able to maintain a boat, a dunga, and in a flood, if a dunga is sort of broken, or even normally there's an issue of maintenance and the boat gets sunk or something. So they just take up these, salvage the wooden material from the boat, and rather than reconstructing a boat which is now becoming costlier, they have a sort of a slum like a tenement of wooden tenement on stilts. And these were primarily located on the Suntkal, but also on the Jhelum, which are located there. So I believe that at a certain point leading up to the 80s, there was this demand, okay, we also need a permanent house, because now they no longer want to continue with being the boat people, now they want to settle down. So this was a period, I would say, late 80s and into the 90s, when you have the boatman colony coming up in Bimina, wherein most of the people who were located in the Sutkal and the Jhelum and who were living in Dungas, they sort of take up uh, uh, housing which is provided by the state in areas such as the Boatman's colony. So that gives you a basic rough idea.
Okay. So, moving on to how these communities were built, how how was their social structure formed? How were their communal dynamics, and most importantly, how did they create their own economy?
I mean, you're speaking about the people who are living on the water or specifically the Hajis.
People who lived on water, like they were located at Dal primarily, and then eventually people settled in Jhelum also. So, just an idea about how it was in Dal and then in Jhelum.
So, I mean, if you talk to people who are living, most of them would say that they migrated after a riot in the city, and this happens in 1830. And then you find that there's a sort of a total de-link between them and the city at large. So generally, you talk to them, they say once or twice in a year we would come to the historical city. So that shows, I mean, physically they're located almost 1 to 2 kilometers from, let's say, the Jamia Masjid, which is in the heart of the city. But then the way they sort of recount their experiences and their father's experiences, they say that they would come to the city maybe once or twice or thrice in a year. So that shows how they have sort of, because of political happenings, totally sort of isolated them from themselves from the larger city. But then life has to go on. I mean, you can't sort of have life without any outside linkage. You are dependent upon supplies, even if you are growing everything initially. The water is a rich source of food and other stuff, but then you need other things, rice, etc., clothes, for which you are dependent upon the city. So you find that mostly the stories are, okay, there were these sort of peddlers who would come into these sort of hamlets. So these evolved as hamlets within the water, wherein maybe 6 monthly or quarterly, whatever, they would come and they would sell and their things. But there was not much of an financial exchange happening with the city. I mean, they were basically growing their own food stuff, which was sort of more than enough for them. But the sort of the interaction that you see now between them and the city, wherein they are one of the sources of food for the city, it is much later. It happens gradually in the second half of the 20th century, and then it further continues. I mean, today they're sort of very much a part of the city economy, because you would find many of them are sort of in different trades, sort of they are linking up with the trades that are a part of the city life. But for a larger part of, I would say, a century and more, they were totally isolated. As opposed to it, you have the Hanjis, who are basically not bona fide residents of Srinagar, but these are people within different categories. Some would be taking, transporting rice to the city. Some would be transporting sort of building material and other things into the city. And some, as I said, were basically engaged with the tourism activity, who gradually became an integral part of the city pulse. I mean, if you see, and if you read some of the accounts that we have in terms of the 19th and 20th century travelogues written by Europeans, you find how well connected the Hanjis as a people, as a community were, both to outsiders who were visiting Kashmir as well as to the local merchants and artisan classes. And that is wherein they make a space for themselves within the hospitality, tourism, and the Kashmir art industry. Now, these are things that happen gradually. I mean, initially they're just providing the services of transportation and lodging, and they are organizing the hunts, etc., etc. But gradually, because you have a visitor, he wants to buy something which Kashmir is famous for, which is Kashmir art. So then you're taking him to the merchant, and then there are these sense of relations that are happening, which are primarily economical, firstly, but gradually they also become social relations, wherein you are treating each other with respect. But as a community, the Hanjis are and still remain a very inward-looking community. So, especially if you talk about it's a very patriarchal society. So generally, you'll find that while men have sort of married outside the community, not only in Kashmir but outside Kashmir, women tend to be limited to household chores. They don't sort of engage in business. and mostly they're married within the community also. So it's a community which identifies itself as something, as a coherent unit, social unit, and sort of all their social functionings in terms of marriages, etc., happen within the community at large.
Okay. Just to end the conversation, because we have pretty much discussed different aspects of it, what are some key factors that urban projects need to include?
I mean,
Ensure, I know it's just an idea that we want, it's just a seed of an idea that we want to put out there, that we can preserve, sustain, and empower marginalized communities with unique.
Okay. So, I mean, if you come to the present process which is happening in the city, which is smart city, it is a continuation of the same thing, wherein you have a set of people who are not local, and there's nothing wrong in being an expert in an area and not being local. We all do it, but you don't invest yourself in a project. You invest yourself in a community, and especially when you're dealing with issues which are on the scale of a city. So basically, what's happening, you have people coming and they want to do a project, and their sort of a whole, I would say, investment of personal time, personal interest is related and proportional to the project and the sort of the consultancy that comes at the end of the project. When you see about city, when you look at cities, it is an investment, a long-term investment. It should come from people who are genuine, and one of the way of looking at it, not from the eye of a project specific or a design specific solution, but something which evolves over a period of time. So this is where communities should be involved, and this is where historically, I would say, since some time now, NGOs have been working.
Okay. Now it's a bit of a philosophical question, I would say, but what kind of loss would it be for Kashmiri culture if this was to decline eventually?
I mean, let me tell you an example. Some years back, I had gone to the part of the inner Dal, and it was with some officials from the tourism department. And we went to an island which is in the vicinity of Ashaibal. Now, the island was historically inhabited by people who make boats. Okay? So now all the people have been removed from that area. They have been relocated. I'm not exactly sure whether it is in Rakhara or somewhere else, but the people have been relocated. There were one or two decent looking old houses, how the tourism department says decent. Rest have been demolished, and you could also see that there were many boats still there, which they still come on and off to repair, and they still have agricultural land there. So the officials of the tourism department came and they had this idea of history that यहाँ पे they used to make boats. Okay, let's set up an interpretation house in one of the houses, and we will get people here and we will showcase to them how boats were made. And that is so ironic. The people who were actually making it, they have been dislocated, and after their dislocation, you are sort of making a sort of a theater of what they were doing as a livelihood. It's wrong. We need to learn lessons from how we were living with it. There will be issues, but that does not mean that you dislocate people from a historical area. I mean, that approach is very, at the least, undemocratic, I would say.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
giving us your time.